Kyung-ho pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the prison ship. His hands shook as he held his datapad close to his chest. The other human prisoners did not look at him. They never did. He was too young, too skinny, and too scared to be useful to anyone. The ship had been traveling for 3 days now. 3 days since the Sethrak Empire soldiers had raided their mining colony on Kepler 442b. 3 days since everything went wrong. Kyung-ho remembered that morning clearly. He had been sitting in the inventory office, checking supply numbers on his datapad. The work was boring, but he liked it. Numbers made sense. People did not. His thick glasses kept sliding down his nose as he typed, and his messy black hair fell into his eyes. Then the alarm started screaming. The attack happened so fast. Green laser fire cut through the morning sky. Massive ships with snake-like designs landed in the colony center. Sethrak soldiers poured out like water from a broken dam. They had scales that changed color, long arms that ended in claws, and eyes like yellow fire. The colonists tried to fight, but it was hopeless. The Sethrak had better weapons, better armor, and more soldiers. In 2 hours, the entire colony was captured. Now Kyung-ho sat with 43 other prisoners in the belly of an alien ship. Most of them were miners or security guards. Big, strong people with rough hands and loud voices. They talked about escape plans and fighting back. Kyung-ho just listened and tried to stay invisible, but being invisible was about to become impossible. The ship shuddered as it landed on something solid. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors outside their prison. The door slid open with a hiss and Captain Vessel Commander Kreth entered the room. Kreth was tall, even for a Sethrak. His scales were dark green with silver stripes that seemed to move in the light. A long cape hung from his shoulders and his yellow eyes looked at the prisoners like they were insects. "Humans," Kreth said, his voice like gravel in a metal can. "Welcome to Processing Station 7. You will work in our mines until you die. Some of you might last a year. Most will not." Behind Kreth, 6 Sethrak guards stood ready. Their weapons glowed with deadly energy. "However," Kreth continued, "we have a special tradition here. One prisoner from each group gets to meet our pets. It helps the others understand what happens to those who cause trouble." The prisoners shifted nervously. Everyone knew this was not going to be good. Kreth's eyes scanned the group slowly. They passed over the big miners and the tough security guards. They stopped on Kyung-ho. "You," Kreth pointed a clawed finger at him, the small one with the glass eyes. "Come forward." Kyung-ho felt his stomach drop to his feet. His mouth went dry and his hands started shaking worse than before. "Me?" he whispered. "Now," Kreth ordered. The other prisoners moved away from Kyung-ho like he had a disease. No one tried to help him. No one even looked sorry. They were all thinking the same thing. Better him than me. Kyung-ho stood up slowly. His legs felt like they were made of water. He clutched his datapad tighter and walked toward Kreth on unsteady feet. "What is that device?" Kreth asked, looking at the datapad. It's just for work," Kyung-ho stammered. "Inventory lists and stuff. Nothing important." Kreth made a sound that might have been laughing. "Keep it. Where you're going, you will not need to worry about work anymore." The guards grabbed Kyung-ho's arms and dragged him out of the prison room. They walked through long corridors with walls that curved like the inside of a giant snake. Strange symbols glowed on the walls and the air smelled like metal and something else Kyung-ho could not identify. They went up a ramp and through another door. Suddenly, Kyung-ho was outside under an alien sky. 2 suns hung overhead, one red and one yellow, casting weird shadows on everything. The ground was black rock that looked like volcanic glass. In front of them was a hole in the ground. It was perfectly round and about 30 feet across. Kyung-ho could not see the bottom. "This is the Nethvar pit," Kreth said, walking to the edge. "The Nethvar are a species we conquered 20 years ago. They fought us with poison and stealth. Very dangerous. Very angry. Now they serve as living weapons and examples of what happens to those who resist the Sethrak Empire." Kyung-ho tried to back away, but the guards held him tight. Kreth continued talking like he was giving a tour. "The Nethvar are serpents. Large ones. They have venom that can paralyze a full-grown human in seconds. Their teeth are like needles and their scales are harder than armor. We keep them hungry so they are always ready to kill." One of the guards laughed. It was not a nice sound. "But the best part," Kreth said, his scales changing to a brighter green, "is that they are smart. Smart enough to know they are prisoners. Smart enough to hate their captors. When we drop enemies into the pit, the Nethvar take their time. They play with their food. Kyung-ho felt sick. His vision was getting blurry, and not just because his glasses were sliding down his nose again. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a fighter. I never hurt anyone. I just counted supplies. I'm nobody important." Kreth leaned closer. His breath smelled like sulfur and old meat. "That is exactly why you were chosen, little human. The important ones need to see what happens to the unimportant ones. It makes them more cooperative." The guards dragged Kyung-ho to the very edge of the pit. Far below, he could see movement in the shadows. Things were slithering around down there. "Big things, any last words?" Kreth asked. Kyung-ho looked down into the pit, then back at the Sethrak captain. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Always be polite, Kyung-ho. Even when people are not polite to you. Sometimes kindness can change everything. Thank you for telling me what was going to happen," Kyung-ho said quietly. Most people would not have been that honest. Kreth blinked in surprise. In all his years of throwing prisoners into the pit, no one had ever thanked him before, but he recovered quickly. "Push him in," he ordered the guards. Kyung-ho felt hands on his back. Then he was falling. The pit walls rushed past him in a blur of black rock. His glasses flew off his face and disappeared into the darkness. His datapad slipped from his hands but somehow stayed close to him as they both tumbled toward the bottom. He hit the sandy floor of the pit hard. Pain shot through his whole body, but he was still alive. The datapad landed next to him with a soft thud. Above him, far away, he could hear Kreth talking to the guards. Their voices got quieter as they walked away, leaving him alone in the darkness. But he was not really alone. All around him, he could hear movement. Soft sounds in the sand. The whisper of scales against stone. Heavy breathing that was not quite human and not quite animal. Kyung-ho sat up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. Without his glasses, everything was blurry, but he could see shapes moving in the shadows. Big shapes, long shapes. The serpents were coming closer. He was about to meet the Nethvar, and he had a feeling his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. Kyung-ho pressed his back against the smooth wall of the pit and tried to control his breathing. Everything was blurry without his glasses, but he could see enough to know he was in serious trouble. The pit was deeper than he had thought, maybe 40 feet from top to bottom. The walls were made of the same black volcanic glass as the surface, polished so smooth they reflected what little light came from above. The floor was covered in fine sand that felt soft under his hands, but it was the movement in the shadows that made his heart pound like a drum. The serpents were everywhere. Even with his poor vision, Kyung-ho could see them sliding through the sand around the edges of the pit. They were huge, much bigger than any snake he had ever seen or read about. Some looked 20 feet long, maybe more. Their scales caught the dim light from above and threw it back in strange colors. One of them was coming closer. Kyung-ho tried to make himself smaller against the wall. The serpent moved slowly, its body flowing like water through the sand. As it got nearer, he could see more details that made his stomach turn cold. Its head was the size of a watermelon with eyes like golden coins. A hood flared out behind its head, covered in patterns that looked like silver writing. When it opened its mouth, Kyung-ho could see fangs as long as his fingers, dripping with something that was definitely not saliva. The creature stopped about 10 feet away from him. Its golden eyes stared right at him, unblinking. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air between them. Kyung-ho had read about snakes on Earth. He knew they used their tongues to smell and taste their surroundings. This one was probably figuring out what he was and whether he would make a good meal. The serpent raised its head higher and made a sound. It was not quite a hiss, not quite a growl. It sounded almost like it was trying to talk. More serpents began to gather. They came from all directions, sliding out of holes in the walls that Kyung-ho had not noticed before. Soon there were at least 15 of them forming a loose circle around him. All of them were staring. Kyung-ho's mind raced. Captain Kreth had said these creatures were smart. Smart enough to hate their captors, smart enough to play with their food. But as he looked at them more carefully, something seemed off about what Kreth had told him. These serpents did not look like mindless killing machines. The one with the silver patterns on its hood was clearly the leader. It kept looking back at the others and making different sounds. Soft clicking noises mixed with musical hisses. The other serpents responded with their own sounds like they were having a conversation. They were talking to each other. Kyung-ho had always been good at noticing things other people missed. It came from being quiet and watching instead of talking. Now sitting in this pit waiting to die, he noticed something important. The serpents were not acting like hungry predators. They were acting like they were trying to figure out a puzzle. The leader made a longer series of sounds, more complex than before. It sounded almost like a question. When none of the other serpents answered, the leader tried again, using different tones. That was when Kyung-ho realized something amazing. They were not just talking to each other. They were trying to talk to him. Without really thinking about it, Kyung-ho found himself responding. But instead of using standard human language, he spoke in Korean. It was what his grandmother had taught him when he was little before she died. He still remembered some of it. "Annyeonghaseyo," he said quietly. "Hello." Every serpent in the pit went completely still. The leader's eyes went wide. Its hood flared out even more, showing more of those silver patterns. It made a sound that was definitely surprised. Then it tried to copy what Kyung-ho had said. The result was not quite right, but it was close enough that Kyung-ho felt his heart skip a beat. The serpent had actually tried to repeat his greeting. "Oh my God," Kyung-ho whispered. "You can learn languages." He tried another word. "Chingu." Friend again, the leader attempted to copy the sound. This time it was even closer to correct. The other serpents began making excited noises. Not threatening sounds, but the kind of noises people make when they discover something interesting. They started moving closer but slowly, carefully, like they did not want to scare him. Kyung-ho looked around for his datapad. It had landed about 6 feet away from him when he fell. Moving very slowly so he would not startle the serpents, he crawled over to pick it up. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. The solar battery was almost full from the light of the 2 suns above. Kyung-ho had loaded it with all kinds of reference materials for his inventory work, including language databases and cultural information about the human colonies. He activated the translation program and held the screen so the serpents could see it. The leader came closer, its huge head only a few feet from the datapad. Its golden eyes focused on the screen with obvious intelligence. Kyung-ho typed in "hello" and watched as the word appeared in standard human script. Then he spoke it out loud. "Hello." The leader made a sound that was definitely an attempt at copying him. Then Kyung-ho tried something else. He drew a simple picture on the screen using his finger. A circle for a head, lines for a body, a basic stick figure drawing of a human. The serpent's eyes lit up with understanding. It moved its tail through the sand, drawing its own picture. A long curved line that clearly represented a serpent. Communication. They were actually communicating. For the next several hours, Kyung-ho sat in the sand with a circle of giant alien serpents around him, working out the basics of language exchange. He would show them words and pictures on his datapad. They would try to copy the sounds and draw their own symbols in the sand. The serpents, it turned out, had their own writing system. They used their tails to draw flowing curves and spirals in the sand. The patterns were beautiful and complex. Nothing like the random scratches he would have expected from animals. These were not animals at all. They were people. Different kinds of people, but people nonetheless. As the alien suns moved across the sky above the pit, Kyung-ho began to understand what had really happened here. The Sethrak had not captured dangerous beasts. They had captured an intelligent species and then treated them like monsters. No wonder the serpents had fought back on their home world. Anyone would fight back if invaders destroyed their cities and enslaved their people. The leader, who Kyung-ho had started thinking of as Yoon-soo, because of her elegant way of moving, seemed to understand what he was thinking. She drew a complex pattern in the sand that somehow conveyed sadness and loss. Then she pointed upward, toward where the Sethrak guards had been standing. She made a sound that was definitely angry, but not angry at Kyung-ho. "Angry at their captors, I know," Kyung-ho said softly. "They told me you were dangerous killers. But you are not, are you? You are just trying to survive." Yoon-soo tilted her head in a way that looked almost like nodding. Then she did something that surprised him completely. She gently nudged his datapad with her nose, pushing it closer to him. Then she settled down in the sand nearby and waited patiently for him to continue their lesson. The other serpents did the same, arranging themselves in a circle like students in a classroom. They wanted to learn. And for the first time since he had been captured, Kyung-ho smiled. He had always been terrible at talking to other humans. But apparently he was pretty good at talking to alien serpents. Above them, the guards thought he was being slowly tortured to death. Below, in the pit that was supposed to be his grave, Kyung-ho was accidentally starting the first peaceful first contact between humans and another intelligent species. He had no idea he was about to change the galaxy forever. 3 days had passed since Kyung-ho fell into the pit. 3 days of the most amazing discovery of his life. The Sethrak guards above had stopped checking on him after the first day. They assumed the serpents had killed him quickly and were probably fighting over his bones. They had no idea that 20 feet below them, a quiet revolution was taking place. Kyung-ho woke up each morning as the two suns climbed over the edge of the pit. The serpents had given him a corner of their underground home where he could sleep safely. They had even brought him water from a hidden spring that bubbled up through cracks in the rock. But it was not their kindness that amazed him most. It was their intelligence. The Nethvar were not just smart. They were brilliant. Yun-Su, the silver-marked leader, had learned to read basic human writing in just 2 days. She could recognize dozens of words on his datapad and was starting to understand grammar. The other serpents were not far behind, but more importantly, they were teaching him about their own culture. On the second day, a smaller serpent named Minho had shown Kyung-ho something incredible. Using his tail, Minho had carefully swept away a section of sand near the back wall of the pit. Underneath was not more sand but carved stone. The entire floor of the pit was covered with writing, not Sethrak writing. Nethvar writing. The serpents had been using the sand to hide their work from their captors. Every night after the guards left, they would uncover sections of the floor and continue carving their stories into the stone. Every morning they would cover it up again. Years of secret writing covered the pit floor. Poems, histories, scientific theories, mathematical equations, all of it carved with patience and precision by creatures the Sethrak thought were mindless animals. "How long have you been doing this?" Kyung-ho asked, running his hand over the smooth curves of their script. Yun-Su drew numbers in the sand. The Nethvar counting system was based on spirals, but Kyung-ho had figured out the basics. 20 years. They had been writing in secret for 20 years. "Since we were captured," Minho managed to say in broken standard human. His voice was soft and musical, nothing like the harsh sounds the Sethrak made. Kyung-ho felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air in the pit. "You have been prisoners here for 20 years? The serpents around him made sounds of agreement. Sad, tired sounds. Yun-Su began to tell him their story, using a mixture of words, drawings, and gestures. Kyung-ho listened with growing horror and amazement. The Nethvar had once lived on a beautiful world of vast libraries and learning centers. They were scholars and scientists, poets and mathematicians. Their cities were built around great spiraling towers filled with books and research materials. Then the Sethrak Empire arrived. The Sethrak had not understood what they were seeing. To them, the spiral towers looked like fortresses. The gathering of serpents in large groups looked like military formations. When the Nethvar tried to protect their libraries from being destroyed, the Sethrak saw it as armed resistance. The war that followed was not really a war at all. It was a misunderstanding that killed millions. The Sethrak destroyed the libraries thinking they were weapons factories. They captured the Nethvar scholars thinking they were soldiers. They scattered the survivors across their empire, using them as guards and executioners because they believed the serpents were natural killers. But the Nethvar were not killers. They were teachers. "We tried to tell them," Yun-Su said slowly, her standard human getting better every hour, "but they would not listen. They see scales and fangs and think monster. They do not see minds and hearts." Another serpent, an elderly female with pale blue markings, slithered forward. Her name was Hae-won, and she had been a mathematician on the Nethvar homeworld. Using her tail, she began drawing equations in the sand. Kyung-ho recognized some of them. Advanced physics and engineering problems that human scientists had been working on for decades. But Hae-won's solutions were elegant and simple, using mathematical concepts he had never seen before. "This could solve the power problems on the mining colonies," Kyung-ho whispered. Hae-won nodded. "Energy flows in spirals, not straight lines. Humans think too much in straight lines, very inefficient." As the day went on, more serpents shared their knowledge. There was Sung Min, who understood medicine and had been working on treatments for diseases that affected multiple species. There was Bo-Ra, who composed music by scratching mathematical patterns into stone, and then humming the resulting melodies. Every single serpent in the pit had been a scholar or artist or scientist before their capture. The Sethrak had accidentally collected the greatest minds of an entire civilization and then used them as weapons. But the most amazing discovery came when young Su, the youngest serpent in the group, showed Kyung-ho something hidden in a crack in the wall. It was a book, not a human book or a Sethrak book, but an actual Nethvar book. The pages were made from a material that felt like silk but was stronger than metal. The writing spiraled across each page in beautiful flowing patterns. "We saved what we could," Young-Soo explained shyly. "When they burned the libraries, some of us grabbed books and hid them in our body pouches. This one is about growing plants. Very important to remember." Kyung-ho held the book carefully like it was made of glass. It was probably one of the last surviving pieces of Nethvar literature in the galaxy. The Sethrak had destroyed everything else. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. Yoon-Soo came closer, her golden eyes serious. "Because you listen. First human to listen. Maybe you can help others listen too." That evening, as the sun set and the pit grew dark, the serpents gathered in a circle around Kyung-ho. They had done this every night since he arrived, but tonight felt different. "We want to show you something special," Yoon-Soo said. The serpents began to sing. It was not like any music Kyung-ho had ever heard. Their voices blended together in harmonies that seemed to come from the stone itself. The mathematical patterns Bora had been working on came alive as melody and rhythm, but it was not just music. It was history. The song told the story of their homeworld, the great libraries with their spiraling towers, the scholars who spent their lives seeking knowledge and wisdom, the terrible day when the sky filled with Sethrak ships and everything changed. It told of families separated, of books burned, of friends who died trying to protect their cultural treasures. But it also told of hope that someday someone would understand what they really were. As the last notes faded into silence, Kyung-ho felt tears on his cheeks. He had never heard anything so beautiful or so sad. "That was your history," he said. "Our history," Yoon-Soo corrected gently. "Now it is your history too. You are part of our story now, and we are part of yours." Kyung-ho looked around at the serpents surrounding him. 3 days ago he had been terrified of them. Now he realized they were not his captors. They were his friends, and maybe, just maybe, they were the key to changing everything. Above them, the Sethrak guards walked their patrols, never knowing that in the pit below, the future of the galaxy was being quietly rewritten by a scared human teenager and a group of serpentine scholars who refused to let their culture die. The revolution had begun with books and songs and mathematical equations written in sand. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions started with the quietest voices. A week had passed since Kyung-ho fell into the pit, and his life had developed a rhythm that would have seemed impossible to anyone watching from above. Every morning, he woke up to the sound of gentle humming. The serpents started each day with what they called greeting the light. As the two suns climbed over the edge of the pit, casting their mixed red and yellow glow onto the sandy floor, the Nethvar would sing a soft melody that welcomed the new day. Kyung-ho had learned to join in, humming along with their beautiful harmonies. His voice was not as musical as theirs, but they seemed to appreciate his effort. After the morning song, they would begin what Kyung-ho had started calling school time. It was not like any school he had ever attended. There were no desks or chalkboards, no strict schedules or boring lectures. Instead, the serpents and Kyung-ho would gather in a circle on the sand, and someone would begin teaching. Today it was Eun-Soo's turn to lead the lesson. "Today we learn about growing food," she announced, her standard human much better now after a week of practice. She used her tail to draw pictures in the sand, simple diagrams showing how plants grew from seeds, how they needed water and light and good soil. But these were not earth plants she was drawing. These were Nethvar plants from their home world. "This is Melshan," she said, drawing a spiral-shaped flower. "Very good for healing cuts and burns. Grows fast in warm sand." Minho slithered forward, excited. "And this is Kolvine," he added, drawing long, twisting vines. "Fruit tastes like sunshine. Very sweet. Birds love to eat them." "Birds?" Kyung-ho asked. The serpents all made sounds of sadness. Hae-won, the old mathematician, spoke quietly. "Many creatures lived on our world. Flying ones, running ones, swimming ones. All gone now. Sethrak ships poisoned the air and water when they attacked. Kyung-ho felt a familiar anger building in his chest. Every day he learned more about what the Sethrak had destroyed, and every day it made him more upset. An entire world full of life and knowledge and beauty, wiped out because of fear and misunderstanding. But the serpents did not like to dwell on sadness for long. Young-soo, the youngest of their group, quickly started drawing new pictures. "Look, look," he said eagerly. "I remember the dancing trees. They moved with the wind like they were alive." Soon all the serpents were sharing memories of their home world, drawing pictures and describing wonders that no longer existed, forests that sang in the wind, rivers that glowed with friendly bacteria, mountains made of crystal that reflected the light of their 3 moons. Kyung-ho added his own drawings to the collection. Pictures of earth trees and flowers, of oceans and snow-capped mountains. The serpents were fascinated by the idea of frozen water falling from the sky. "Ice is very rare on hot worlds," Bora explained. "We only saw it in the highest mountains. Tell us more about this snow." As Kyung-ho described winter on Earth, he realized something wonderful was happening. They were not just learning each other's languages anymore. They were sharing their cultures, their memories, their dreams. After the morning lesson, they would work together on what Eun-soo called the Great Project. The Great Project was ambitious and dangerous. The serpents were creating a complete record of their civilization, carved into the stone walls and floor of the pit. Not just their history and science, but their art, their music, their poetry, their philosophy, everything the Sethrak had tried to destroy, the Nethavar were secretly preserving. Kyung-ho had become their chief recorder. His datapad, with its translation programs and digital storage, could hold thousands of pages of information. Every day he would type in new sections of Nethavar knowledge, while the serpents carved the same information into stone. 2 copies of everything, hidden in different ways. If they find the stone writing, they still will not find the digital files, Sungmin had explained. And if they take your little machine, the stone will remain. Today they were working on a section about Nethavar medicine. Sungmin was teaching Kyung-ho about healing techniques that used sound and vibration instead of chemicals. "Human medicine cuts and burns to heal," Sungmin said, making gentle vibrations in his throat. "Nethavar medicine sings and soothes. Both ways work, but singing is kinder." He demonstrated by humming a specific pattern of notes. The sound made Kyung-ho feel relaxed and peaceful, like all his worries were melting away. "That is amazing," Kyung-ho said, typing the musical pattern into his datapad. "Human doctors would love to learn this." "Perhaps someday they will," Eun-soo said hopefully. The afternoon was always devoted to what they called thinking time. This was when individual serpents would work on their own projects while Kyung-ho studied their language and culture. Hae-won would work on mathematical equations, solving problems in physics and engineering. Bora would compose new songs, scratching musical notations into clay tablets. Young-soo would practice his writing, copying passages from the ancient book they had saved. Kyung-ho would read. He'd always loved reading, but now it felt like the most important thing in the world. Every book on his datapad, every story and poem and scientific paper, was a piece of human culture that the serpents had never seen before. His favorite thing to read aloud was poetry. The serpents loved human poetry, especially the older works that talked about nature and beauty and the meaning of life. Today, he was reading them a poem by a Korean poet named Yoon Dong-ju. It was about stars and hope and staying true to yourself even when everything around you was dark. The serpents listened with complete attention, their scales shifting to peaceful blue and green colors as they absorbed the words. This poet understood something important, Eun-soo said when Kyung-ho finished. Beauty exists even in darkness. Hope lives even in prisons. Yes, Kyung-ho agreed. My grandmother used to read his poems to me when I was little. She said they helped her remember that bad times do not last forever. Your grandmother sounds very wise, Minho said, like our memory keepers. They were the oldest serpents on our world, the ones who remembered all the stories and songs. Are any of them still alive? Kyung-ho asked. The serpents made sad sounds. We do not know, Hae-won said. We were separated when the Sethrak captured us. Families split apart, friends lost. We have been alone here for 20 years. That evening, as they gathered for their usual circle, Young-soo brought out the precious book again. But instead of reading from it, he handed it to Kyung-ho. You read tonight, Young-soo said. Your voice is getting better at our sounds. Kyung-ho took the book carefully. The silk-like pages felt warm under his fingers. The spiral writing seemed to flow like water across each page. He had been practicing Nethvar pronunciation for days, and now he could read simple passages. The book was about agriculture, but it was written like poetry. Even instructions for planting seeds became beautiful when written in the Nethvar style. As he read, his voice stumbling sometimes over the unfamiliar sounds, Kyung-ho realized that something incredible was happening. He was not just learning about the Nethvar culture. He was becoming part of it. When he finished reading, the serpents sang their evening song. But tonight they had added something new. Woven into their traditional melody were bits of the Korean poem he had read to them earlier, East and West. Human and alien, past and present, all blending together into something beautiful and new. Above them, the Sethrak guards walked their patrols, counting prisoners and checking security systems. They had no idea that in the pit below, a small group of beings was quietly building bridges between two very different kinds of people. Kyung-ho fell asleep that night, surrounded by the gentle breathing of his serpentine friends, dreaming of spiral towers and singing trees and a future where understanding was stronger than fear. He had no idea that tomorrow would bring visitors, and that his peaceful routine was about to be interrupted in a way that would change everything. The sound of heavy machinery woke Kyung-ho from his peaceful sleep. Above the pit, metal clanged against stone and alien voices shouted orders. The serpents around him stirred nervously, their scales shifting to worried yellow and orange colors. It had been 2 weeks since Kyung-ho fell into the pit. 2 weeks of the most educational and peaceful time of his life. But now something was happening up there that did not sound good. Yoon-soo slithered over to him quickly. "Hide the book," she whispered urgently. "Cover the stone writings. Something is wrong." The serpents moved with practiced speed, sweeping sand over their carved words and pushing their precious cultural artifacts into hidden cracks in the walls. Kyung-ho shoved his datapad under his shirt and tried to look like he had been sleeping. Above them, voices grew louder. Not just Sethrak voices, but other sounds too. The whine of lifting equipment and the rumble of heavy vehicles. "Expansion project starting today," someone shouted in the Sethrak language. Kyung-ho had picked up enough of their words over the past 2 weeks to understand basic conversations. "Need to check all the old pits before we start digging." Kyung-ho's blood went cold. They were going to look into the pit. After 2 weeks of assuming he was dead, the Sethrak were finally going to check on their disposal site. "Get ready," Minho whispered. "If they see you alive, they will ask questions. Bad questions," Young-soo added fearfully. A rope dropped over the edge of the pit. Heavy boots appeared at the rim above, and a Sethrak engineer began climbing down. His scales were bright blue with black stripes, and he wore a helmet with lights that cut through the shadows below. The serpents had arranged themselves around the walls of the pit, trying to look like mindless animals. They lay coiled and still, their eyes half closed, breathing slowly. To anyone who did not know them, they would look like sleeping. Predators digesting their last meal. Kyung-ho pressed himself against the wall in the darkest corner he could find and tried to look like a pile of old bones. The engineer reached the bottom of the pit and turned on a bright light. The beam swept across the sandy floor, over the motionless serpents, and stopped on Kyung-ho. "What in the 7 spiral hells?" the engineer muttered. He walked closer, his light shining directly on Kyung-ho's face. There was no point in pretending anymore. "You are alive," the engineer said in amazement. "How are you alive?" Kyung-ho sat up slowly, squinting in the bright light. "The serpents did not kill me," he said simply. "Impossible. The Nethavar are programmed killers. They have destroyed entire military units. They killed 300 soldiers when we first captured them." "No," Kyung-ho said, finding courage he did not know he had. "They were defending their libraries. You destroyed their books, so they fought back." "Anyone would fight back?" The engineer stared at him like he had grown a second head. "Libraries? These are animals. Dangerous animals." That was when Yoon-soo made her mistake. Or maybe it was not a mistake at all. Maybe she was just tired of pretending. She raised her great head and spoke, her words clear and precise despite her accent. "We are not animals. We are scholars. We are teachers. We are people." The engineer stumbled backward, his light swinging wildly. It talked. The monster talked. "She is not a monster," Kyung-ho said, standing up. "Her name is Yoon-soo. She was a historian on their homeworld before you captured her. More voices called down from above. What is taking so long down there? Is the pit clear? The engineer looked up at his colleagues, then back at Kyung-ho and Yun-soo. His scales were shifting through colors Kyung-ho had never seen before. Confusion, fear, and something that might have been shame. They are intelligent, the engineer whispered. Very intelligent, Kyung-ho confirmed. They have been teaching me about their culture. They know advanced mathematics, medicine, agriculture, engineering. They could help solve problems your empire has been struggling with for years. By now, all the serpents had given up their act. They were sitting up, watching the engineer with their golden eyes. Minho came forward and began drawing mathematical equations in the sand. Complex formulas that dealt with energy efficiency and power generation. Haewon joined him, adding her own calculations. Soon the floor around the engineer's feet was covered with advanced scientific work. This is impossible, the engineer said, but his voice was getting quieter. Captain Kreth said they were mindless killers. Captain Kreth was wrong, Kyung-ho said. Look around you. Do mindless killers write poetry? Do killers preserve libraries? Do monsters sing lullabies and teach children? The engineer was looking at the equations in the sand. His training as an engineer was warring with everything he had been told about the Nethvar. The math was clearly advanced, clearly intelligent work. Show him the book, Yun-soo said quietly. Young-soo hesitated, then brought out their precious saved volume. He opened it carefully, showing the engineer the beautiful spiral writing and delicate illustrations. This is agricultural science from our home world, Young-soo explained. We saved it when your soldiers burned our libraries. It contains techniques for growing food in difficult environments that could help feed your growing empire. The engineer reached out to touch the page, then pulled his hand back like it was on fire. We destroyed libraries? You destroyed everything, Sung-min said sadly. You thought our research centers were weapons factories. You thought our universities were military bases. You never asked what we really were. From above, another voice called down. Engineer Tosca, report your status immediately. The engineer, whose name was apparently Tosca, looked up at the pit opening, then back at the serpents and Kyung-ho. His scales were now a deep purple color that Kyung-ho had learned meant deep thinking. I need to report this, Tosca said finally. To who? Kyung-ho asked. To my supervisor. To the station commander. Maybe to the Imperial Science Council. Tosca paused, his voice getting stronger. This changes everything. If the Nethvar are intelligent, if they were scholars and not warriors, then we have made a terrible mistake. Not just with us, Yun-soo said gently. How many other species has your empire conquered without understanding what they really were? That question hung in the air like a challenge. Tosca called up to his colleagues. The pit needs more inspection time. Give me another hour down here. What for? It should be empty except for bones. Just give me an hour, Tosca called back. There are some structural issues I need to examine. He turned back to Kyung-ho and the serpents. Show me everything. Show me proof that you are what you claim to be. If I am going to report this up the chain of command, I need evidence that no one can deny. For the next hour, the serpents gave Tosca the most intensive education of his life. They showed him their writing, their mathematics, their art, their music. They shared their history and their dreams. They proved beyond any doubt that they were not monsters. But people at Kyung-ho acted as translator and cultural guide, explaining human perspectives and helping bridge the gap between the serpents and their captor. By the time Tosca climbed back up the rope, his worldview had been completely shattered and rebuilt, and at the top of the pit, he would have to decide what to do with the most important discovery in the history of the Sethrak Empire. The truth about the Nethvar was finally going to reach the surface. The question was, would anyone believe it? As Tosca disappeared over the rim of the pit, Kyung-ho and the serpents looked at each other with a mixture of hope and fear. Everything was about to change. Whether for better or worse, none of them could say. But the secret was out now. There was no going back. 2 hours after Engineer Tosca climbed out of the pit, everything exploded into chaos. Kyung-ho and the serpents could hear the arguments starting above. Loud voices in the Sethrak language, growing more heated by the minute. Heavy footsteps running back and forth. The sound of vehicles arriving and leaving. They are fighting about us, Yun-soo said quietly. Some believe, some do not. What happens if the ones who do not believe win? Young-soo asked nervously. Nobody wanted to answer that question. The answer came 3 hours later when Captain Vessel Commander Kreth himself appeared at the edge of the pit. His scales were dark red with anger, and his yellow eyes blazed with fury. "Engineer Tosca has filled my command center with impossible stories," Kreth shouted down at them. "He claims you monsters can think and talk and write. He says the human boy has been having tea parties with serpents." Kreth laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "I am here to prove him wrong, and to finish what should have been finished 2 weeks ago." He raised a weapon that glowed with deadly energy. "Time to die, human. And time for the Empire to remember why we keep these creatures locked up." But before Kreth could fire, another voice called out from behind him, "Stand down." "Captain?" A new figure appeared at the edge of the pit. This Sethrak was different from the others. Older, with silver and gold scales that marked him as very high-ranking. His uniform was decorated with symbols that Kyung-ho did not recognize. "Director Vashtem," Kreth said, lowering his weapon slightly. "I was just disposing of a problem." "The problem is not in the pit, Captain. The problem is that we may have been wrong about the Nethvar for 20 years. Director Vashtem looked down at Kyung-ho and the serpents. "I have reviewed Engineer Tosca's report. I have seen the photographs of the mathematical work. I have heard the recordings of their speech. If even half of what he claims is true, we have made a mistake of galactic proportions. They are animals," Kreth insisted. "Dangerous animals that killed hundreds of our soldiers." "Show me," Director Vashtem called down to the pit. "If you are truly intelligent, prove it now. Show me something that no animal could do." Yunsu looked at Kyung-ho, then at her fellow serpents. "This is our chance," she said. "Maybe our only chance." She moved to the center of the pit and began to speak. Not in standard human, but in formal Sethrak language. Her pronunciation was perfect, her grammar flawless. "Honored Director," she said, "we greet you in the manner of scholars seeking wisdom. We offer you knowledge freely given, friendship freely offered, and understanding freely shared." Director Vashtem's scales shifted to colors Kyung-ho had never seen. Shock, amazement, and something that might have been embarrassment. But Yunsu was not finished. She began to recite poetry in the Sethrak language, ancient poems that spoke of honor and wisdom and the search for truth. Poems that every educated Sethrak would know by heart. The director's hands were shaking. Minho joined in next, speaking about mathematics and engineering in technical Sethrak terms that showed deep understanding of their science. Haewon added her own knowledge, discussing physics theories that human and Sethrak scientists had been debating for years. One by one, every serpent in the pit demonstrated their intelligence in ways that could not be denied or ignored. Finally, Youngsu brought out their precious book. He opened it to a page covered with beautiful illustrations and began to read aloud. Not in Nethvar but in Sethrak, translating their agricultural science into terms the director could understand. This technique could increase crop yields on desert worlds by 300%, Youngsu said. "We developed it on our homeworld before the war. We offer it freely to help feed your people." Director Vashtem was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very soft. "How long have you been able to speak our language?" "Always," Yunsu answered. "We learned it in the first months of our capture. We tried to tell you what we were, but no one would listen. After a while, we stopped trying. It was easier to let you think we were animals than to keep having our words ignored." "The soldiers you killed when we first captured you?" the director asked. "Why did you fight?" "They were burning our libraries," Sungmin answered, his voice full of old pain. "Books that took thousands of years to write. Research that could have helped everyone. Art and poetry and history. We tried to save what we could. When your soldiers kept burning everything, we fought to protect our culture. We thought the libraries were weapon storage," Director Vashtem said quietly. "And we thought you were barbarians who destroyed knowledge for fun," Haewon replied. "We were both wrong about each other." Captain Kreth was still holding his weapon, but his scales had changed to confused purple. "This is impossible. The intelligence reports clearly stated they were aggressive predators." "The intelligence reports were wrong," Director Vashtem said firmly. "We saw what we expected to see instead of what was really there." He turned to address the pit directly. "On behalf of the Sethrak Empire, I offer formal apologies for the misunderstanding that led to your imprisonment, and I request permission to learn more about your people and your culture." "Permission granted," Yunsu said with dignity. "Knowledge shared makes everyone stronger." What happened next moved faster than anyone could have predicted. Within a week, teams of Sethrak scientists and cultural experts were working in the pit alongside the Nethivar. The sandy floor became a classroom where two very different species taught each other about mathematics, science, art, and philosophy. Kyung-ho found himself in the middle of it all, still serving as translator and cultural bridge. But now, instead of hiding their activities, they were encouraged by the highest levels of the Sethrak government. More Nethvar were brought from other prisons and weapon facilities across the empire. Each time the same pattern emerged. Creatures labeled as monsters revealed themselves to be scholars, artists, and scientists who had been trying to preserve their knowledge in secret. The mining station was converted into a research facility. The other human prisoners were released and given the choice to stay and help with the cultural exchange or return to human space. Most chose to stay. The work was too important and too exciting to leave. Captain Kreth was reassigned to a position where he could do less damage. He never fully accepted what had happened, but he stopped trying to shoot anyone. 6 months later, Kyung-ho stood in what had once been a pit of death and was now a beautiful amphitheater. Curved stone benches surrounded a central space where beings from dozens of species gathered daily to share knowledge and stories. The Sethrak Empire had begun investigating other species they had conquered, looking for more cases where they had misunderstood what they were dealing with. Early reports suggested the Nethivar were not the only scholars they had mistaken for monsters. "You started something big," Yoon-soo said, settling her coils next to where Kyung-ho sat reading. "We started something big," Kyung-ho corrected. "I just fell into a pit. You were the ones brave enough to trust a scared human kid with your secrets." Above them, carved into the stone wall in dozens of different scripts, was the motto they had chosen for their new academy. "Here all beings are scholars. Here all wisdom is welcome. Here, we read together in peace." Kyung-ho looked around at the students and teachers from a dozen different worlds, all learning from each other. Human teenagers worked on math problems with elderly Sethrak engineers. Young Nethivar taught art classes to curious beings whose names he was still learning to pronounce. It was not the life he had planned when he left Earth as a nervous inventory clerk. But it was exactly the life he was meant to live. Sometimes the most important. Revolution started with the quietest people in the smallest places, and sometimes an awkward human kid falling into an alien. Snake Pit was exactly what the galaxy needed to change everything.